Okay, we'll get started again. We've got a few people coming in still. But our next presenter, we've got Dr. Julie Barkworth. So Julie is a senior research analyst at the Corrections Research Evaluation and Statistics Unit for Corrective Services New South Wales. So Julie is an experienced corrections researcher, and her research interests include procedural justice, cooperation and compliance behaviour, defiance and resistance to authority, prison social climate, prisoner wellbeing, and rehabilitative culture. I couldn't just get someone to grab the door there for me. Cheers, sorry.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Elkie and the committee for inviting me to present at this year's forum on forensic mental health in a digital age, and really for this opportunity to share some of the really exciting work that we've been. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Elkie and the committee for inviting me to present at this year's forum on forensic mental health in a digital age, and really for this opportunity to share some of the really exciting work that we've been doing in the space of implementing digital tablets in New South Wales correctional centres. So just talk a bit about the program itself. Essentially, digital tablets were implemented in New South Wales correctional centres as part of an initiative surrounding the Premier's priority to reduce adult reoffending, which really aimed to transform inmate rehabilitation through digital technology. So people in our prisons tend to spend around 16 hours a day in their cells with really limited activities to keep them engaged. And therefore, this was an initiative that was aimed at really making better use of that time. So the tablets provide people with access to a range of resources. They can be used to maintain connections with family and friends, and they provide people with an opportunity to develop their technological skills and help prepare them for reintegration. The tablets were initially introduced in 2 centres as part of a pilot program in 2020 and have continued to be implemented through an ongoing staged rollout across the state. So in 2021, an additional 10 centres received the tablets. By 2023, a total of 19 centres had access to tablets, and today there are 25 centres across New South Wales that have access to digital tablets. So the devices that are provided to people in our jails are mid-sized tablets with full colour touchscreens. They are connected to a secure Wi-Fi network that is specific to each centre, but they're otherwise internet disabled and tamper-proof. So the very earliest phase of the tablet rollout involved like relatively limited features, and then those have been added to over time and of course are continually being developed to really enhance the overall usability and purposefulness of the tablets. So since their initial implementation, phone calls in particular, which are only available for use until 10 p.m, as well as some pre-approved whitelisted websites, select games, and then some centre administrative information have been available. And then additional features have been added at various stages across that rollout, which includes self-service administration. So people can check their trust account balances, they can check when they've got upcoming court dates, and they can gain information about their sentence, for example. They also have access now to an online buy-up system, so their sort of like weekly or fortnightly purchases can be done online. And there are also e-forms on the tablets now. So all these requests and applications that used to happen via paper-based forms and passed back and forth through correctional officers in the units are now actually done via the tablets. And then there are some other paid features that have been added, so people can choose to opt in or out of those, that they give them access to like extra games, as well as entertainment bundles that include TV, movies, and music. And then finally, facility messaging is another feature that's really been available since the initial implementation, and that allows staff to send messages via the tablets. They can include a PDF attachment as well if needed, and that can be done across all tablets in the state, or it can be quite specific to either a centre, a unit, or even an individual tablet. Okay, so just a couple of things around the actual policy and procedures of the tablets themselves. So where appropriate, they are provided to inmates on reception to a centre. The inmates are given a verbal explanation of the terms and conditions of use, what their responsibilities are with the tablet and what they might be liable for. And that includes a cost of $500 for any deliberate damage to the tablets, but that sort of outcome is determined through a misconduct process if any damage does occur. Then they're also asked to sign a document to acknowledge their understanding of those responsibilities and liabilities. And of course, people don't have to take a tablet. They very much have the option to refuse having access to one. The tablets themselves cannot be withdrawn as a form of punishment, but they might be withdrawn or even not provided in the first place if an assessment indicates that an inmate might likely cause deliberate damage to the tablet or the tablet's accessories, if there is any evidence of misuse of the tablet, or if the inmate themselves is either likely to harm themselves or to harm others through their use of the tablets. Centres essentially develop local operating procedures for the allocation, use, collection and inspection of the tablets. So they can vary between centres, and depending on the type of charging arrangements that are now available. So until recently, all centres had tablet charging units. So if you recall from the video, they're these big black box looking things and all the tablets get placed in there to get charged. So in the centres that still have those charging units in place, the tablets are issued to inmates just prior to their evening lock-in, and then they're collected again during the morning let-go, and the tablets are getting charged throughout the day via those units. The tablets are then also checked for damage during that particular collection process. Earlier this year, though, we've started a staged rollout of in-cell charging across some of the centres. So there's now some where tablets and accessories can just be stored in the cell, so the inmates are able to charge them sort of on an as-needed basis or when they want. And then the officers complete weekly damage assessments to make sure that the tablet and the tablet accessories are still in good working order. And then any damaged or faulty devices are first assessed through a troubleshooting process to determine if the issue can be resolved in centre. Otherwise, they get sent back to our vendor for further inspection, repair or replacement. Okay, so following the implementation of the tablets, our team, the Corrections Research Evaluation and Statistics, or CRES as we call ourselves, was asked to complete an agenda of evaluation to really understand people's views and experiences of the tablets. So 5 studies have been completed to date that cover inmate uptake and experiences of using those tablets, as well as trends in behavioural outcomes and program participation following the tablet implementation. We've also got a 6th study that examines staff perspectives of the tablets, which is currently in the process still of being completed. And then we've done a kind of lessons learned paper following our experiences of actually delivering online surveys to people via the tablets. Just for today though, try and keep things a little bit simpler, and I'll focus on some of the really key findings from those first 5 studies that have been completed. Okay, so the first of these studies involved a self-report survey administered via the tablets in the 2 pilot centres. So one was a male centre and one is a female centre. The link to the survey was included under those sort of pre-approved whitelisted websites, and then inmates were informed about the purpose of the survey and how to access it through facility messages that are sent to the tablets. This study had quite a few objectives aimed at understanding how people were using the tablets and their experiences with them, but just for the purposes of today, I'm going to focus on just a brief overview of the tablet uptake and then individual factors associated with that uptake, and then how tablet uptake and the perceived value that people actually place on having access to the tablets are associated with their perceptions of the prison social climate, their general well-being, and their sense of autonomy. Okay, so following that initial implementation of tablets in the 2 pilot centres, 87% of respondents indicated they were using the tablet on a daily basis, and just under half of them were using it for at least 2 hours per day. So quite a lot of people started relying on them quite quickly. Most respondents also reported that they had at least some previous experience with either a digital tablet or smartphone. In terms of individual characteristics that sort of predicted the extent of tablet use, we found that males were more likely to use the tablets or use them more frequently than females, as well as those who have previous experience with digital technology. But none of our other individual characteristics there were significantly predictive of tablet uptake. We then ran a few hierarchical regression analyses that examined the association between what we kind of called the quantity and quality of tablet use on 3 outcomes of interest, while also controlling for those individual characteristics. So here we talk about quality of tablet use as being represented by items that measured whether people felt having access to those tablets had actually improved their connections with their family and friends and their overall experience of their time in jail. So the quantity of tablet use itself had actually negative associations with each of those outcomes, but only when the quality of tablet use had been considered. And there we saw stronger positive associations between those variables measuring quality of tablet use and inmate perceptions of social climate, well-being, and autonomy. So it kind of suggests that the mere extent of inmates' tablet use might have some possibly negative effects on their experiences of prison life relative to their quality of tablet use. And one kind of explanation that we considered here was sort of reflected in literature on passive and active social media use. So passive use in this case is defined as activities that include just reading through discussions, comments, or reviews and watching videos and viewing pictures. Active use, on the other hand, was when someone actually, responded to someone or shared and posted content. And then in that particular study, it was found that active use was associated with lower levels of anxiety and depressive symptoms, and passive use was, and more time in general spent on social media was associated with higher levels of depression and anxiety. So for us at the time of this survey, there were, as I mentioned, some fairly limited tablet features available. So perhaps the phone and entertainment features could be considered active use of the tablets, while the remaining features were more likely to be passive, where they were often restricted to just reading content on the tablets. And so in that case, we suspect that inmates who spend the majority of their time using those more passive features of the tablets rather than those features that really represent active use might be less likely to experience positive outcomes. That finding really highlights then the potential benefits that the potential benefits of tablets, I would say, are not necessarily achieved simply by more extensive availability and use of digital technology alone, but that it's really important to accompany that kind of rollout with development of content and practices that are really designed to encourage pro-social experiences and change. So our second study was also then completed in pilot centres and involved semi-structured face-to-face interviews to really further understand people's experiences of using the tablets and the positive outcomes they associate with having access to tablets. So again, this study had a number of areas of focus that were centred around the implementation of tablets, but I'm going to focus, apparently it's not going to show me which three I want to focus on. I am just going to focus on three of these particular objectives that were around the main facilitators and barriers to successful implementation, and also people's perceptions of how the tablets impacted some key outcomes. So in terms of understanding facilitators and barriers to successful implementation of tablets, we obviously approach that from the perspective of the people that the tablets were designed for. And key to this was really simply the availability of the devices. So some international examples of tablet implementation in jails have suggested a ratio of like 1 tablet to every 6 inmates. The New South Wales implementation, however, was designed so that every individual had access to their own tablet. Of course, when tablets are faulty or they become damaged, this can create issues with availability, and often new inmates being received into centres where tablets were available, particularly early on in the rollout, did have to wait for a period of time before they had access to one. Beyond that, like sort of having some information about the tablets, training and support was also important. As I said before, most people did have some experience with digital technology prior to having access to these tablets. So many were able to really figure out how the tablets worked just by spending a short amount of time playing around with them and navigating through the different features and applications and that. But for those who were really less familiar with technology, there was some initial information available about how the tablets work, but for the most part, inmates really relied on each other to learn how they worked. And in some cases, that really brought them closer together. In terms of barriers, the main issues related to the kind of like the connectivity of the tablets. So Wi-Fi reception would drop out, or centres would kind of experience complete outages. I do think a lot of that had to do with that particular installation of network infrastructure that was very specific to each centre, but that also was likely impacted by the fact that, you know, there's some very thick concrete walls in the jails, and so reception can be a little bit spotty throughout as a result of that. And then device faults were also a little more problematic, probably in the early stages of the rollout, with headphones not particularly working well. The microphones were considered a bit unreliable or unclear, and then some complained of a short battery life, but I think that, you know, really depends on how much time they were spending on the tablets. But of course, yeah, several of those issues have also been addressed with upgrades in the tablet models. There's like a new sort of brand of headphones, I think, in circulation now. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a recent introduction of like in-cell charging. So they're not stuck with a lap tablet for half the night. We also then asked people about how their relationships with other people and their experiences in jail had changed since having access to the tablets, and they linked some very specific features of the tablets to some really key outcomes through both direct and indirect means. So for example, the ability for them to make calls from their cells had obviously very direct links to improving their relationships with family and friends, and that was really important for people to be able to connect with their children, where previously they were often being locked into their cells before children had even come home from school. And so the tablets meant that they were able to maintain more frequent contact with their children and with their families, and could be on the phone to help them with like things like their homework after school, and even participate in their sort of bedtime routines. So feeling that they were able to really retain that active role within their family also played an important role in relieving some of the stress that they previously had felt when they couldn't help their family work through issues as they arose, because yeah, they were often very restricted in the extent of contact they could have with them. The phones were also indirectly linked to a reduction in friction and a general improvement of the atmosphere within the centre, as it meant that people no longer had to queue and take turns to use the public unit phones during that really limited time that they were out of cell and, you know, not otherwise engaged in other activities. The use of the unit phones in terms of, you know, whose turn it was and, you know, being limited at times to only one short phone call so the next person in line could use the phone was quite a significant source of frustration among inmates and also the staff who, you know, really needed to keep order when those tensions arose. So most people are now inclined to wait until they're in their cell before making their calls, and which while calls are still time restricted, they do have more opportunity now through the tablets to make as many calls as they like, basically, provided they have the funds, of course, to pay for them. The introduction of like the online buy-ups and self-service administrative features were also really important for improving people's sense of autonomy, which was then indirectly kind of related to a reduction in friction between inmates and staff. So people reported that having that access to a lot of their own information, like about the court dates and trust account balances and whatnot, meant they were less reliant on staff for getting that information, and there were fewer instances of kind of tensional conflict when inmates might have, you know, previously been a bit pushy or aggressive in wanting immediate access to that information, so they could manage a lot more of that themselves. And then, of course, having access to things like games, news and music also helped to relieve boredom and stress, and that then had flow-on effects as well for providing a more calming atmosphere within the centre, again, helping to reduce points of friction and conflict among inmates and between inmates and staff. And then all of that together kind of generally meant that people felt their overall well-being was just better. Okay, the third study is just basically an extension of that first one that we undertook in the pilot centres, but it follows a broader rollout of tablets across New South Wales centres, again with self-report surveys administered by the tablets, but to people in 19 centres where they were available at the time. And then in addition to examining people's ongoing use of tablets and their engagement with some of those additional features that had since been added to the tablets, we also drew on a subsample of respondents who had spent time in prison both before and after the introduction of tablets and had reported to us like their frequency of contact with family and friends over both time periods. So we used that sample to understand how having a change in contact with their family and friends might have been associated with perceptions that the tablets had also had positive impacts on like various relationships and experiences of prison. So yeah, just briefly, like again, the majority of respondents reported using the tablets daily, but the figures have sort of gone up a little bit as the tablets have been in use for longer and rolled out across more people. And there are more people using them for at least 2 hours at a time now. And then 3/4 as well also report that the evenings is the most likely time that they're using them. So that's around 2 hours after lock-in until about 10 p.m. at night. And that probably, you know, realistically coincides with the time that they're making a lot of their phone calls to their family. We also asked people to identify like the 5 features they considered were most important, and that included what they already had access to and what they would like to have access to. So that's why video calls appears in this list. They can't actually make video calls from the tablets at the moment, but it is definitely a feature that you know, is in discussion. And so, yeah, obviously phone calls is a standout feature again for them, but yeah, they would like video calls, and then things like entertainment, self-service, admin, games. Nothing too surprising in terms of what they really want the tablets for. And then drawing on that subsample that I mentioned in terms of people who had reported their frequency of contact before and after the introduction of tablets, we again here see that more than double the number of people who were previously having daily contact with their family and friends, and now sort of having that extent of contact following the introduction of tablets. So I think it's really showing that having access to the tablets has really increased their ability to maintain that contact. And the majority of respondents also reported that having access to those tablets has had a really positive impact on relationships with family and friends and their overall experience of life in jail. And then most also indicated that the tablets were important for improving interactions with other people in prison and with the centre staff as well. Of course, my animation works now. We then ran a series of hierarchical regression analyses to examine whether that reported change in contact with family and friends was related to people feeling their relationships and experiences had improved since having access to digital tablets. So after controlling for those individual characteristics, and probably unsurprisingly, we found that yes, an increase in the frequency of contact with their family and friends was positively associated with them feeling that their relationships with family and friends had improved, but also their interactions with other people in prison, their interactions with centre staff, and their general overall experience of life in jail had also improved. Okay, the last two studies use a controlled interrupted time series design to consider whether the implementation of tablets has had a positive impact on some more measurable outcomes. So the first of these examines behavioural indicators of safety and order within correctional centres with a focus on all recorded assaults or violent incidents and then proven violent incidents, as well as alcohol and other drugs. So the phased rollout of tablets here meant that we were able to use centres where tablets had already been implemented as the kind of intervention sites, and then similar centres where the tablets hadn't yet been implemented as comparison sites. So just briefly to explain these hectic looking graphs, the two black dotted lines kind of depict the trends in the weekly rate of incidents or offences, with the bigger dotted line representing the comparison group and the smaller dotted line representing the intervention group. And then the red line represents the difference between the two groups and really depicts the effect of the introduction of the tablets. So looking at the first graph, we can see that the trend prior to tablet implementation follows quite a similar declining pattern in both groups. So that's the weekly rate of assaults per 100 inmates, but after tablets were introduced, while those weekly rates remain relatively stable in our intervention group, they actually increased sharply in the comparison group, returning to our 2020 levels. And then focusing on that red line, really, that one that represents the difference between those groups, we saw there was this slight increase in weekly assault rates prior to the implementation of tablets. And then after that, rate fell quite sharply, which again could just be attributed to the increase following implementation in that comparison group. And then a similar pattern was identified for our proven violent offences in which someone was physically harmed. So that's the middle graph, and that indicates a marginally significant decline after the introduction of tablets across the intervention sites. Again, likely driven by that sharp increase in the rate of offences in our comparison sites. And then for alcohol and other drug-related offences in custody, we can see a pretty stable trend in the rate of offences post-tablet implementation. So there was no real effect of the implementation of tablets in terms of AOD-related offences, and that was probably, again, just driven by a pre-existing decline for both groups that seemed to continue sometime post-implementation as well. And then, so I guess just taking those results together, we see that the digital tablets had a bit of a significant impact on two of our site-level indicators of inmate behaviour. And if we think back to some of the earlier findings I've presented, particularly from that qualitative study, we might expect the results here to be linked to some of the benefits provided by the tablets in terms of, say, access to in-cell phones, that in turn have really reduced people's exposure to like more high-risk situations like the phone queues that are more prone to violent altercations, and hence, you know, there's fewer instances of reported or proven violent offences occurring around that point. And the final study then aimed to examine if the introduction of digital tablets had any measurable impact on inmates' participation in behaviour change programs. So participation here is expressed as the proportion of expected dosage delivered, or the percentage that was actually delivered, where the expected dosage is calculated from the total hours that would be estimated to be delivered in a given week, just based on the number of participants enrolled in the program and the number of program hours that were scheduled per session. And again, trends in participation are compared before and after implementation of the tablets at those intervention and comparison centres. So program dosage delivery steadily increased at intervention sites compared to the comparison sites during that post-implementation period. So that might indicate that dosage delivery underwent some like incremental improvements at intervention sites after the tablets were introduced, and may in fact reflect that there was increased participation in behaviour change programs. So here we sort of pose that, you know, as the tablet functionality stabilised and the initial rollout issues started to be addressed, that impact of digital tablets on participation rates might have increased due to like the increasing effectiveness of tablets for enhancing people's ability to really manage their own time and their own administrative needs. As I noted earlier, you know, inmates have very limited time out of cell, and during that time, they were previously trying to like make phone calls to family and friends. They're trying to get a hold of staff to access like personal administrative information, all those kinds of things. So they're very limited on time. And now that they're able to manage a lot of those tasks themselves via the tablets while in cell, they may be less resistant to actually attending their programs throughout the day. And then as well, other benefits associated with digital tablets include around like increased safety, that improved sense of agency and better overall well-being. Might also have had some positive flow-on effects in terms of their motivation for that goal-directed behaviour towards behaviour change, and yeah, ultimately like leading to that greater program participation. So yeah, just I guess bringing everything together, there's a lot. There's some good evidence, I think, that, you know, the tablets are providing people in prison with a whole range of benefits that would ultimately also have some flow-on effects for staff as well. There are clearly some standout features that are particularly contributing to those benefits. So the phone calls, the self-service admin features, they've consistently been identified as having positive impacts on inmates' contact and connections with family and friends, their sense of autonomy, those interactions among and between inmates and staff, the overall atmosphere of the centre, and of course, as we just saw on those more measurable outcomes of like safety and order and program participation as well. And of course, there has also been some challenges linked to the implementation of tablets, with technological issues in particular sometimes impacting people's ability to really efficiently and effectively use the tablets at all times, and that does create a source of frustration, but there are, you know, continuing efforts to address some of those issues and reduce their frequency. And then of course, yeah, the ongoing implementation of the tablets themselves, updates to the tablets, updates to the available features, they also provide important opportunities, I think, for maximising the benefits that are associated with the tablets, and also for identifying opportunities that might help build on and promote some of these conditions that are really important for building positive rehabilitative prison environments, which is our ultimate goal. So yeah, I will leave it there and just point out that a lot of these studies are already available on our public website if, yeah, you want to get a hold of them and learn a little bit more. And of course, my email address is up there as well if anyone would like to reach out and discuss any of the findings or other experiences that we've had. So thank you.
So that was of particular interest to me because my area of interest is digital mental health in prisons. So when I went down to Sydney to present to Corrective Services New South Wales, I suddenly heard about all of these tablets in prisons, one per person inside, and it talks to the benefit of having a system supporting the infrastructure, the implementation, the policies that are needed, the approvals that are needed to support this, to make it effective before you start building some of the work that they're planning on doing around interventions and rehabilitation.